Hi, everyone. I'm Vladimir Dutit. We are watching all the news happening in the United States and around the world. Check out these monitors behind me. These are feeds coming into the CBS News Broadcast Center from all of our stations and affiliates around the country. For the next hour, you and I are going to go through all the news that's breaking behind me and anywhere else around the world where we have a team of correspondents and analysts. Let's get into it. President Trump's lawyers are back in court today after the legality of the country's old wartime law the administration is invoking to deport Venezuelan migrants. What to expect from the hearing this afternoon. Plus, the Supreme Court hears the fight over Louisiana's congressional map and claims of racial gerrymandering. We'll explain what's at stake and the potential precedents the case may set. And the Defense Department is planning to use lie detectors as part of an investigation into recent national security leaks. What we know about the information that was allegedly leaked. This is CBS News 24/7. We begin this hour at the White House, where the economy and tariffs are front and center today. President Trump will meet with Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry before they're expected to make a major announcement. Stocks this morning jumped on reports from the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg that the tariffs the White House will implement next month will be more narrow in scope than originally thought. Who would have thunk that? I want to bring in CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe, who's tracking all of this for us. Ed, markets up today only because the president is constantly gyrating on what he is doing with regards to the tariffs. One day he's implementing them, one day he's not, one day they're wide-ranging, the next day that they're narrow.
Yeah, well, welcome to Trump's White House, Vlad. This morning, there are reports that, in fact, the tariff threat is narrowing to more industry-specific tariffs. And so that appears to have the market quite happy, and thus the multi-point jump there so far this morning. One thing the president is doing later today is announcing an economic development deal down in the state of Louisiana, where they're set to announce about $5.8 billion in steel manufacturing set for that state, driven by Hyundai, the Korean automaker. That deal coming as an example, the White House will say, of the ongoing push to manufacture such things in the United States, the kind of thing that could stave off some threatened tariffs either on South Korea or on the auto industry more broadly. So we'll wait and see what the president has to say about that there. April 2nd is what the White House has been calling the Day of Liberation, or when these tariffs are supposed to go into effect around the world on essentially virtually everything coming in from just about every country, but with the word that these tariffs may become a little more industry specific, and perhaps you're going to see some changes in exactly what gets slapped with a bit of a levy and what doesn't. Of course, all that comes amid the concerns and the polling that shows Americans still concerned about inflation, still concerned about the economy, and believing that the president could be doing much more to fight rising prices.
So this was sort of interesting that popped up over the weekend, Ed. We're hearing that the National Security Advisor and the Second Lady are headed to Greenland this week. The trip is already causing controversy. I noticed on their Instagram, the Second Lady's Instagram account, the number of Greenlandic people that are essentially saying, please don't come. Also, they're also having elections there, which people think it's not a coincidence. What can you tell us?
Well, they just had elections recently that led to a more conservative parliament that is sort of walking slowly towards a possible referendum on independence from Denmark. But we know the Second Lady is set to be there Thursday through Saturday. Among other things, she's attending a big dog sled race in that state, in Greenland. It's not a state, it's not a province, it's Greenland. And she's going to be there with her son. What we don't know is whether the National Security Advisor's trip, which is set to occur also with the Energy Secretary, is happening at the exact same time or ahead of time. He is primarily there to visit the U.S. Space Force base that is based on the island. Of course, Greenland, given where it sits, is a strategically important location for all sorts of concerns, whether it's Arctic shipping routes and security of the Arctic Circle, which has become an increasingly busy way of passage, especially for the Russians and the Chinese, as they try to find faster, cheaper shipping routes and keep reminding the rest of the world that they have the ability to do such things. Obviously, a big fishing area. And then there are a lot of undersea cables that connect essentially North America with Europe, with Africa, that run up into that direction. And there's been concern in recent years that Russian ships may be trying to sort of dislodge some of those undersea cables. And so it's by putting more of a U.S. presence there, the argument is perhaps Russia and China would back off. Also important to remember, while the president himself has talked much more actively, much more openly about somehow taking over Greenland, or making sure it's more within the American sphere of influence. This is something that's been talked about for decades by presidents, by secretaries of state, by the Pentagon, is something that may be necessary one day, given the melting in the Arctic, given Russia and China's increased interest up there, and just the fact that geographically it would be something we'd rather have on our side than potentially an adversarial relationship. But given these visits and given the reaction of Greenlanders, it may be that the relationship is becoming more adversarial simply by showing up.
Yeah, I saw one sort of humorous response to this trip on the Second Lady's social media. If you want to go check out a dog race, go to Alaska. Ed O'Keefe for us at the White House. Ed, my friend, thank you very much. Happy Monday.
Take care.
All right, deportation flights have resumed with a group of alleged Tren de Aragua, or TDA, gang members landing in Venezuela hours ago. Today, an appeals court will rule on a federal judge's decision to block deportations made under the Wartime Alien Enemies Act. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz told Face the Nation the White House is not backing down.
We are saying that TDA is acting as a proxy of the Maduro regime. This is how the Alien and Sedition Act applies, and we cannot have district judges interfering with the commander-in-chief's actions to take care of, in the way he deems necessary, a terrorist organization.
I want to bring in CBS News Department of Justice reporter Jake Rosen for more. So, Jake, what have we heard from the AG ahead of today's hearing?
Well, the Attorney General Pam Bondi defended what Mike Waltz said in an interview on Sunday, and generally this line of argument from the administration that this is, quote, modern warfare, that the Trump administration does not need to formally have Congress go and put forward an act of war against Venezuela or any other country, that because simply these gangs are operating in the United States, and that Nicolas Maduro, the Venezuelan leader and dictator, has done nothing to stop them, that we are thus in a proxy war, and that Donald Trump, President Trump, has authority to use this Alien Enemies Act. We also know that Pam Bondi in that same interview named a number of judges, not just James Boasberg, who's controversially been overseeing this case, and President Trump has had no problem calling him out, but named a number of other justices who have blocked the Trump administration's orders on things like the enactation or the putting forward of the Trump military ban for transgender individuals, or other things like Doge access to parts of the economy and parts of the government. Basically saying that these judges are blocking the nation's agenda from being put in play by on behalf of the Trump administration.
So what have we heard from the AG about the hearing that's happening today?
Well, Pam Bondi said she expects this case to go to the Supreme Court. And while there's an argument today for about an hour, each side will have 30 minutes to present their case. Judge Boasberg just issued a ruling this morning saying that he's not going to rescind his temporary restraining order that currently blocks these migrants from being deported. And Attorney General Bondi said that she expects this to go all the way to the Supreme Court, and in addition to a number of other cases that are well on their way there, whether it's the removal of these migrants or removal of independent agency heads that Donald Trump has also fired, and those people have sued to keep their jobs.
And now the White House is also categorizing these flights, but they're not using the Alien Enemies Act as justification. Is that per that judge's order?
Yeah, and that's really a big crux of this, Vlad, is that the judge has said that there are other tools in the government's toolbox, a number of both congressional laws that are in place to remove these people, in addition to authority of the executive to remove these people on other grounds. The administration, Judge Boasberg has argued in his memorandums in this case, says that the Trump administration just has not followed immigration procedures in this case, and because they have not proven that they're in war or that there's some urgent need to actually deport these people, neither have they been given any due process on their way to El Salvador and that supermax prison there, that basically there are other ways for the government to do this. They are allowed to continue to do this. And he actually encouraged them to if they feel like they need to. In court on Friday, he just said in this way, in the Alien Enemies Act, they cannot.
All right, Jake Rosen for us. Thank you, Jake. Over to the Middle East now. Israeli forces have launched airstrikes on the largest hospital in southern Gaza, killing a senior Hamas leader. This comes as Israeli ground troops are mobilizing, and new evacuation orders have been issued for thousands of Palestinians. CBS News contributor Robert Berger is joining us now live from Jerusalem to talk more about this. Robert, what can you tell us about these latest strikes?
Well, this airstrike hit Nasser Hospital, which is the biggest hospital in southern Gaza in the town of Khan Yunis, and It targeted Ismail Barhoum, a senior Hamas leader who was killed in the attack. Also, a 16-year-old boy killed in that strike. The Israelis saying that basically their message is that Hamas officials have nowhere to hide. If they try to hide in hospitals, the Israeli army is going to get them. Israel says it's killed at least 10 senior Hamas officials since the ceasefire broke down a week ago.
Egypt has a new ceasefire proposal. Robert, what are you hearing about that?
There is maybe some movement on that front, on the negotiation front. The Egyptians, according to Hamas, they've accepted, that Hamas has an Egyptian proposal to release 5 Israeli hostages in exchange for a ceasefire of several weeks. Now, Israel says it still hasn't seen this proposal. And the Israelis have also been pushing for a larger number of living hostages to be freed. They want at least 11 for a ceasefire of several weeks. Now, remember, there are 59 hostages left in Gaza, of whom 24 are believed to be alive. So there's still a long way to go to getting them all out.
All right, Robert Berger for us. Robert, as always, we appreciate you. Thank you.
Sure.
Turning now to the war in Ukraine, U.S. and Russian officials are meeting today in Saudi Arabia for ceasefire talks. Yesterday, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz told Face the Nation an agreement is starting to take shape. Listen.
We are now going to talk about a Black Sea maritime ceasefire so that both sides can move grain, fuel, and start conducting trade again in the Black Sea. And then we'll talk the line of control, which is the actual front lines. And that gets into the details of verification mechanisms, peacekeeping, freezing the lines where they are, and then, of course, the broader and permanent peace, which will be some type of discussion of territory for permanent peace and a lasting peace.
All right, CBS News contributor Samantha Vinograd joins us now. She's a national security expert, and she's coming to us from Washington this morning. So, Sam, both sides agreed in principle on a ceasefire. So what can we expect?
Well, Vlad, it's getting a little hard to keep track of which ceasefire we're talking about exactly because there have been so many iterations. In the first instance, President Trump on the campaign trail mentioned that he would end the war, a permanent ceasefire within 24 hours. We then graduated to a more limited 30-day ceasefire. Last week, we heard discussions after President Trump spoke individually with President Putin and then President Zelensky about a ceasefire affecting energy infrastructure. And then more recently, over the last day or so, we heard about a ceasefire impacting the Black Sea and maritime transit that is really, really critical to global food markets and global grain markets. And so now what we're waiting to hear is if there is any agreement whatsoever on a ceasefire of any kind, whether it's limited to a particular sector, a particular domain, whether it be air, land, or sea, and whether both sides are able to come together and agree on a set of infrastructure or a geography that will be off limits for some period of time.
So how vital is the area surrounding or close to the Black Sea to any deal?
Well, the Black Sea is absolutely critical to world grain markets and just overall food markets around the world. So it's not just Ukraine that has an interest in resuming grain exports through the Black Sea. It's also low-income countries that depend very heavily on grain that's exported through these critical shipping lanes. Now, back earlier in the war in 2022, Turkey and the United Nations negotiated an agreement whereby various vessels could pass through the Black Sea. The war had already started, but could pass through the Black Sea with critical grain exports so as to avoid a meltdown and in global food markets around the world. That initiative lasted about a year, and then it faltered, which has led to a huge plummeting in grain availability around the world, which again really is impacting low-income countries.
And Sam, just remind us again why this diplomacy is going through Saudi Arabia. I mean, are they looking to see themselves and perhaps have the world see them as a major player when it comes to regional disputes like this, even if they're not in their sphere of influence?
Well, Saudi Arabia is not the first country that comes to mind when you think about negotiating an end to the war between Ukraine and Russia. But certainly, Mohammed bin Salman, the ruler of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, has invested a lot of time, energy, and resources to restore the image of the kingdom after the kingdom was accused of murdering Jamal Khashoggi several years ago. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is certainly trying to position itself as a mediator, as a trusted ally of not just the United States, but of other countries around the world, and as a go-to partner when trying to solve issues that are affecting geopolitics on a larger scale. So I think we should expect to see more of Saudi Arabia in the mediation space, much like, for example, we've seen Qatar play this role in other conflicts, including the Middle East conflict that's waging between Israel and Hamas right now.
All right, Samantha Vinograd for us this morning. Sam, thank you so much.
Thanks, Vlad.
Pope Francis is waking up at home for the first time in weeks. What we know about his health and his return to the Vatican. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Got some breaking news to share with you. Our White House team has just confirmed President Trump will hold a cabinet meeting within the next hour. Elon Musk is expected to be in attendance. Right now, the meeting will be closed to the press, but that can change. If we get any updates, we will bring them to you live right here on CBS News 24/7. Meanwhile, Pope Francis is resting at the Vatican today. The 88-year-old pontiff was discharged from the hospital on Sunday after undergoing treatment for double pneumonia for more than a month. Before heading home, he blessed the faithful from his 10th floor hospital suite as thousands cheered his release. Our Chris Livesay is in Rome with the very latest.
Well, it was a long-awaited hello from Pope Francis after what became the longest hospital stay in his papacy. Very well could have ended in goodbye. Pope Francis greeted the hundreds of people who had gathered outside of his hospital, saying thank you for all of the prayers that have been taking place for weeks behind me here in St. Peter's Square, people gathering on a nightly basis to pray the rosary. Now, he left the hospital in typical understated Pope Francis fashion in a low-key papal white Fiat. He also made a stop at one of his favorite churches on his way back to the Vatican, St. Mary Major. And now he is back here in the Vatican, where he spent his first night in more than 5 weeks in the hospital. It started off as a bad case of bronchitis and devolved into double pneumonia, very serious for anybody, let alone an 88-year-old man. In fact, we were told by his doctors that he nearly died on 2 separate occasions while he was in the hospital. But today he is back in the Vatican. His condition is stable, and he is finally back home. Back to you.
All right, Chris, thank you very much. Top Democrats are ramping up their pressure on Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer after his decision to vote in favor of the continuing resolution that avoided a government shutdown. He held his ground this weekend and defended his vote. Listen.
Look, I'm not stepping down. And let me just say this, Kristen. I knew when I cast my vote against against the government shutdown that it would be there'd be a lot of controversy, and there was. But let me tell you and your audience why I did it, why I felt it was so important. My internal gyroscope said, regardless of the fact that some people would not like it, which I knew, that I had to do the right thing for the country and for our party.
I want to bring in CBS News congressional correspondent Nicole Killian for more on this. So, Nicole, I mean, what kind of pressure, if any, is Senator Schumer feeling at the moment? I mean, I know the press is talking about the pressure, but just himself and the way that he sees his role and what he's looking to do going forward, is he feeling that heat?
Well, I think that's why you've seen him out pretty extensively over the last week or so. Granted, he does have a new book that's out, so part of it has been promoting that. But the other part has really been pushing it back against a lot of this criticism that he has been getting from the left with respect to his decision to back the GOP government spending bill along with a handful of other Democrats. But look, at the end of the day, he was caught between a rock and a hard place. You know, he continues to argue that shutting down the government was really the worst of two evils, which is why he felt supporting this GOP bill was the lesser of two evils, but it still isn't stopping some of the criticism. Take a listen to what Connecticut Congressman Jim Himes told our Margaret Brennan on Face the Nation this weekend.
I think we can do a lot better job with the leadership that we had. What I was acknowledging in that town hall meeting, and I will tell you, I've seen a lot of town hall meetings. I saw Chuck Grassley's town hall meeting. I saw my colleagues from Wyoming's, Ruby Red Wyoming's time in the barrel, and people are outraged.
So granted, Jim Himes is in the other chamber. He's in the House. So, that probably doesn't really make Leader Schumer flinch. But I will say I, too, was out there, talking to a variety of voters and constituents as these members of Congress did their town halls over the recent recess from North Carolina to right outside of Washington. And in terms of talking to some Democratic voters, they did tell me, look, we may need to start thinking about new leadership. Some expressed concern about Leader Schumer and Leader Hakeem Jeffries, for that matter. Others said, it might be time to look for younger leadership. So this is a debate, certainly that's been amplified by the situation involving Leader Schumer, but one certainly that the Democratic Party has been arguing since, of course, we saw former President Joe Biden having to step down out of the presidential race last year. That too was about whether or not there should be a change in leadership within the Democratic Party. So again, this is all part of that ongoing discussion, whether or not it will move the needle in terms of forcing Chuck Schumer's hand. I would say unlikely, since he's pretty entrenched here in Congress, which is why he continues to say he's not backing down.
Yeah, that's what I figured. Nicole, you mentioned that the House and the Senate are both back this week after being in their districts and some of them holding these town halls. Are any of the grievances that both Republicans and some Democrats face, Democrats because they feel, as we just discussed, that Democrats aren't doing enough to push back on Trump and Elon Musk, and Republicans because they feel that they're doing too much in allowing an unelected official to have so much control over the federal government? Are they coming back to Washington with any priorities related to some of those town halls?
Well, the main priority remains for Republicans, obviously, now that the government has been funding and that fight is kind of over with for the time being. Republicans are really at the point where they're trying to move ahead with President Trump's agenda, despite some of them getting an earful when they were at home. But they really want to codify some of these changes into law, but they also want to turbocharge the president's legislative agenda, particularly around the issues of border security, energy, extending his tax cuts, as we've talked about over the last several weeks and months here. Of course, there are two different versions. There's a version in the House that is kind of that big, beautiful bill. The Senate bill is a little smaller. So now Republicans, as they come back here, are going to be putting their heads together to try to get that into some type of compromise package. Vlad.
Yeah. And I know, as we just pointed out with the breaking news earlier, Nicole, that the president's going to be holding a cabinet meeting. I'll be very interested in seeing what a congressional reaction is to Elon Musk once again being a part of that meeting that the president's going to hold. I recall, I'm old enough to remember when President Clinton asked his wife, Hillary Clinton, to take control of a very small action item, health care in America, and Congress lost its mind. And now there's one individual basically in charge of all the levers of power in Washington, and it's not the president. So we'll see what happens. Nicole, thank you very much as always. We appreciate it. All right, the popular DNA testing firm 23andMe is now up for sale. What that means for users' personal data as the company looks for a potential buyer. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Here's a look at some of the top stories we're following for you this morning. 2 off-duty firefighters in Oregon are being hailed as heroes for pulling a driver to safety when their car plunged 30 feet off the highway and into a river. The 2 firefighters just happened to be near the incident on Saturday. As water filled the car, they installed a rope system to pull the driver out and into an ambulance. The driver is expected to be okay. Opening statements are set to begin this hour in the bribery trial of Nadine Menendez. She's the wife of former Senator Bob Menendez. He was sentenced to 11 years in prison after being found guilty of accepting hundreds of thousands of dollars in exchange for helping foreign governments. Nadine Menendez has pleaded not guilty to charges. She was involved in her husband's scheme. And DNA testing company 23andMe has filed for bankruptcy and will now go up for sale. The company has been struggling with its business model for years. The announcement came late last night, along with the resignation of the company's CEO. 23andMe will now go through a court-supervised sale, which they believe is, quote, the best path forward to maximize the value of the business. California Attorney General Bob Bonta urged customers to request their personal data be deleted. That's because that data could also be sold or transferred in a potential sale. 23andMe says any buyer will be required to comply with the law and respect customer data. Happening this hour, the U.S. Supreme Court is hearing arguments over Louisiana's congressional map. At issue is this new map approved last year and used in the 2024 election. It created a second majority black district, the state's sixth. It stretched from Baton Rouge in southern Louisiana all the way up to Shreveport. Let's bring in CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson, who's joining me now live from Los Angeles to talk about this. So Jessica, you are listening to the hearing. What are both sides arguing?
So the hearing just began, and if this feels like a little bit of deja vu for you and others, Vlad, it's because this case asks a very similar question to an Alabama case that was decided in June 2023. Essentially, there's a question about whether compliance with the Voting Rights Act, Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which says you cannot dilute voting power on the basis of race, I'm paraphrasing, of course, whether or not there's tension between that and the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause. Right now, Louisiana is arguing, and their argument is we were told by two federal judges that we had to comply with the Voting Rights Act, and that meant drawing another majority black district. Originally, there was only one majority black district, but black people are 32% of the voting public in Louisiana. And so they were told, go back and draw another majority minority district. But then the argument was that in drawing that additional district, they actually violated the 14th Amendment because race was a predominant factor in the drawing of those districts.
So the court, as you know, has faced this issue several times. Just for our viewers to understand, what's so unique about this particular case and what's at stake?
So what's at stake, I think, is really in this particular case, the tension that we just talked about between compliance with Section 2, which is really the only part of the Voting Rights Act that continues to live, that says don't dilute voting power on the basis of race and a whole bunch of other things, like are you a member of a language minority in national origin, but also the tension between that and what the Equal Protection Clause allows, which is maybe not, quote, too much consideration of race. But Vlad, interestingly, this morning, what you also heard is the justices get into a separate issue which might come before them, which is Section 2 itself unconstitutional because it runs afoul of the Equal Protection Clause? And you hear them kind of dancing around that, understanding that this case is narrower than that, but it seems to be looming maybe larger than I even would have expected.
Wow. All right. Jessica Levinson coming to us from Los Angeles early this morning. Thank you, Jessica. Appreciate it. All right, the Pentagon is investigating what it's calling leaks of national security information. Defense Department employees could face polygraph tests to determine who's responsible for the leak. CBS News senior national security correspondent Charlie D'Agata joins us now to talk about this. I think this is sort of remarkable, Charlie. I saw Elon Musk tweeting about it, or whatever they call it, Xing about it. Saying that people will be found. It's sort of like a witch hunt, reminiscent of I guess, the glory days of the Saddam Hussein regime, where they, went after people within their own parties or within their own government. But can they really implement these polygraph tests to figure out who's talking to the press, which isn't illegal?
No, Vlad, another day, another drama here at the Pentagon. So the memo dropped over the weekend, and it referred to recent unauthorized disclosures. So it didn't specify exactly what was leaked or allegedly leaked. And this is where the sort of witch hunt comes on, as you mentioned, right? Because it came on the same day that Elon Musk visited the Pentagon. That was on Friday, amid reports that he had been briefed or was about to be briefed on what the DoD calls O plans or operational plans, and that those plans were to include classified information about how the United States would conduct military operations in the event of a war with China, including what to target and when. So then there were those fierce denials, not least from President Trump, Secretary Pete Hegseth, the DoD spokesman Sean Parnell, who demanded a retraction. Then came this memo from the DoD Chief of Staff, Joe Casper, later that night, saying the use of polygraphs in the execution of the investigation will be in accordance to the law, instructing that investigation to begin immediately. It follows a similar investigation. You want to talk about witch hunt. The Department of Homeland Security has launched one. They say they're going to use polygraphs or lie detector tests, as well as about the same time, the Department of Justice is going to launch their own investigation. So lots of investigations going on. That one is to the selective leak of what they call inaccurate or nonetheless classified information about those Venezuelan drug gangs. But that kind of raises the question of when does a leak become a lie? Because, you know, in my experience, it's usually one or the other, not both.
Right. And again, this is just, it's sort of remarkable that we're having this conversation. I'm just thinking back to Mark Felt, of course, who people will know was Deep Throat during the Watergate era. At least we found out that he was Deep Throat. Imagine the most paranoid president in American history, at least up until recent times. Richard Nixon had said, you know what, everybody's got to go through a polygraph test at the FBI to figure out who's leaking information to Woodward and Bernstein. So I guess the question then becomes, could there actually be any repercussions other than potentially losing your job?
Well, I was just discussing that with my wife. I used to be afraid of war zones. Now I'm afraid of not only losing my job, but going to jail. So the memo was brief, right? It's just one page. And that's how it dropped, right?
Because you mean that if somebody leaked to you, you think that they would come after you?
Well, it's because it's so vaguely worded, okay? So it does say the report will include a complete record of unauthorized disclosures within the Department of Defense and recommend how to improve those efforts. But then it says, if those efforts result in identifying a party responsible for an unauthorized disclosure, they will be referred to the appropriate law enforcement entity for criminal prosecution. So the way it stands, it's not just the leaker who gives the information out, but the people who maybe publish and broadcast that information as well. They may be found, or it may be put toward an entity that would chase criminal prosecution.
That is scary. And even though former CBS Evening News anchor Dan Rather found himself on Nixon's enemies list, they never did anything about it. It was just a list that existed. But if you're now talking that they would actually go after members of the press who are given information and then choose to run with it, that is frightening.
Yeah. So, Vlad, I just want to point out, yes, because a lot of this had to do with the New York Times and their article, because others had followed that. I tried to get a confirmation that Elon Musk had been briefed, and I never got it. In fact, I got quite the opposite, a huge fight pushing back against that. But the New York Times has simply said, look, this is just going to have a chilling effect across the media. It's sort of a veiled threat aimed at all of us.
Yeah, that's true. And a point well taken. Charlie Daggett for us at the Pentagon this morning. Charlie, thank you.
Thanks, Vlad.
All right. We are tracking several wildfires along the East Coast in New Jersey. 2 campsites were evacuated in the southern part of the state as a wildfire burned some 2,300 acres. Containment of that blaze is now up to 80%. And in North Carolina, 2 fires have torched a combined 4,600 acres in the western part of that state. Evacuation orders have been issued in the area, which is still recovering from Hurricane Helene. And the governor of South Carolina has declared a state of emergency. A wildfire in that state is now more than 1,300 acres in size after it erupted on Friday. So let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore with the first look at the national forecast. A lot of wildfires out there, Grant.
A lot going on, really dry conditions across the southeast, even up into the mid-Atlantic and northeast over the weekend. We are getting some relief, and that relief, unfortunately, though, is coming with some severe weather. Over 200 reports of severe weather, mostly hail across the southern Mississippi Valley. But look at all of this rain stretching from the south down into the Gulf states, all the way along through the Carolinas and up into the northeast. And it's not just rain, but actually, look at this. We've got winter weather across the Great Lakes states from this large area of low pressure that, again, is bringing some relief to those fire conditions across portions of the mid-Atlantic all the way down into the Carolinas. So that's the relief, but unfortunately, it is bringing that severe threat. The severe weather, though, will begin to wane as we go through the day. So we're not expecting as much severe weather today compared to what we've seen over the last 24 hours. Let's put this storm into motion here. Let's run it to the east as we see the rain begin to clear off the southeast coast today. Still see some trailing showers over the mid-Atlantic and northeast with more snow from the Great Lakes states up into New England as we go through the next 24 hours or so. That storm system will clear off, and then our focus actually begins to shift to the west, where we've got some late spring warmth that's really starting to feel more like summertime. Look at this. Phoenix today, looking at a high temperature of 95 degrees. They could even be close to 100 degrees tomorrow afternoon, marking potentially the earliest that they hit 100 degrees. 98 tomorrow. Many places across the west, though, dealing with above normal temperatures through the first half of the week. Vlad, back to you.
All right, Grant, thank you very much. More than 500,000 migrants are about to lose their legal status as the administration urges them to self-deport. We'll break down the latest moves from the White House and who it impacts next. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. We've got some breaking news to share with you. A federal judge has denied the Justice Department's bid to lift the block on the president's Alien Enemies Act order. The Trump administration invoked the act to deport hundreds of Venezuelan nationals to El Salvador more than a week ago. CBS News immigration and politics reporter Camila Montoya Galvez has been following this closely, and he joins me now with more on the breaking news. So, Camila, what can you tell us?
Well, now we know that the Trump administration, Vlad, for the time being, will continue to be blocked from citing the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 to deport suspected members of the Tren de Aragua Venezuelan prison gang. This is obviously a big decision by the judge in federal district court in D.C., but there is a hearing today on the administration's appeal of his order, so we'll stay tuned on that too. This is really important, though, because his ruling did also include an argument by the judge that the ACLU and the plaintiffs in this case are likely to prevail in arguing, Vlad, that at the very least, these people who are being accused of gang membership should receive an individual and individualized hearing to actually determine whether they are part of this gang. And we talked about that question of due process. And so the judge is saying, Vlad, that at the very least, the government has to give these people due process before summarily deporting them from the country.
All right, let's talk about the more than 500,000 protections for Cubans and Haitians that were revoked. What are you hearing about that?
This is a major policy change by the Trump administration. Officials are now telling more than 500,000 people from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela who came to the U.S. legally under a sponsorship process created by the Biden administration that they have 30 days to pack their bags, to self-register for self-deportation on a smartphone app created by the government and leave the country voluntarily. If not, the Department of Homeland Security, Vlad, is warning that they will be found, arrested, and deported from the country. And in 30 days, their deportation protections and work permits will expire. These people, again, came to the U.S. legally and right now have legal status, but in the next 30 days, unless a federal court intervenes, they will become part of the undocumented population.
Wow. All right. Let me switch gears and ask you about the case of the Columbia University student activist Mahmoud Khalil. There's a new allegation that he's facing. What is it?
The Justice Department is now accusing Mr. Khalil of essentially orchestrating immigration fraud. They are saying that he failed to disclose several jobs and his work for organizations like the British Embassy in Beirut and also the United Nations Agency for Palestinian Refugees in his green card application. And they are saying that that omission in his application represents immigration fraud and that ground is now a new reason, Vlad, for deporting him from the U.S. And this is in addition to that other argument by the administration that his mere presence here and his activities in the U.S. threaten the foreign policy of the U.S.
Wow. All right. Camila Montoya Galvez with 3 fast-breaking stories for us this morning. Camila, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Much more news ahead. Stay with us. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Actor George Clooney makes his Broadway debut this month, starring in an adaptation of the 2005 Oscar-nominated movie, Good Night and Good Luck. It's the story of pioneering journalist Edward R. Murrow, who took on strong-arming Senator Joseph McCarthy all while withstanding pressure not to make waves at his own news network, of course. This network, CBS News. 60 Minutes correspondent John Wertheim has more.
February, Winter Garden Theater in the heart of Broadway, the set still under construction. George Clooney arrives in character.
This is how they treat the two-time sexiest man alive. You see that? Oh, there he is. Hey, John. How are you, man? How are you?
Ever the everyman, he doesn't stand on ceremony, he hurdles over it.
They don't care. They don't care.
But now it can be told. Hollywood's famously cool leading man has the jitters.
I mean, look at this place. This is proper old Broadway, and it's exciting to be here. You know, look, let's not kid ourselves. It's nerve-wracking, and then there's a million reasons why it's dumb to do.
What do you mean?
Well, it's dumb to do because you're coming out and saying, well, let's try to get an audience to take this ride with you back to 1954.
When the other three estates fail, when the judiciary and the executive and the legislative branches fail us, the fourth estate has to succeed. Has to succeed. As 60 Minutes is here right now on our first day.
Kidding aside, Clooney made the point, these are chilling times for the news media.
ABC has just settled a lawsuit with the Trump administration, and CBS News is in the process of...
The process he's talking about? President Trump has lodged a $20 billion lawsuit against CBS, making the unfounded allegation that 60 Minutes engaged in election interference. CBS has since filed a motion to dismiss the lawsuit. All this as the network's parent company, Paramount, is trying to close a merger deal which requires approval from the Trump-appointed chair of the Federal Communications Commission.
We're seeing this idea of using government to scare or fine or use corporations to make journalists smaller. Governments don't like the freedom of the press. They never have. And that goes for whether you are a conservative or a liberal or whatever side you're on, they don't like the press.
What does this play tell us about the media's ability or willingness to withstand this kind of pressure?
It's a fight that is for the ages. It will continue. You see it happening at the LA Times. You see it happening at the Washington Post, for God's sake.
You guaranteed the corporate would have no influence over news content.
Journalism and telling truth to power has to be waged like war is waged. It doesn't just happen accidentally. You know, it takes people saying, we're going to do these stories, and you're going to have to come after us. And that's the way it is.
The full 60 Minutes interview is streaming now on CBSNews.com and on Paramount+. Let's bring back CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore with the final look at the national forecast. Hi, Grant.
Hey, Vlad, it's a rainy and kind of a stormy start to the week across the Gulf states. In fact, the entire eastern seaboard is going to be tracking this cold front bringing rain. And hey, look, I know it's spring, but we've got snow across the Great Lakes all the way into New England today. This storm system will clear the coast later today while the warmth builds out west. You're talking about not just temperatures above normal, but nearly record territory. Phoenix, 95 this afternoon. The warmth spreads all across the southwest today, tomorrow, into the middle of the week. Meanwhile, across the Midwestern states, chilly conditions for now with those departing snow showers. Places like Detroit, temperatures near 41 degrees this afternoon. New York looking at highs today around 54 degrees. Some showers that will clear with that system as we go through the second half of the day today. The Pacific Northwest, not bad. Mild conditions, a little rain up towards the northwest, up towards Seattle today, 53 degrees. And then looking at warming conditions across the west over the next couple of days. Vlad, back to you.
All right, Grant, thank you very much. That does it for me, folks, but stay right where you are. After the break, Mugo D-Ways live from San Francisco with all the news breaking from coast to coast. This is CBS News 24/7.